Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Friday App Review. My name is Ray Meyer. I'm joined by Fred Chung.
Good afternoon.
And we're going to take a look at some apps today. So we asked you guys for some suggestions for recipe apps, and you did not give us any, which means one of two things. Either you guys don't like recipe apps, or there aren't any recipe apps.
This is such an overwhelming crowd.
Yes.
Yeah.
You just couldn't pick from amongst the very many good ones.
Just too many, huh?
Apparently so. Yeah. So what we're going to do this week instead is have a look at some of our favorites. So Fred's got a couple of food-related apps. Which ones are you going to take a look at today?
Yeah, we're going to have a look at My Food and Big Oven.
Excellent. And well, the reason I was asking you guys for recipe apps was because I didn't know of any good ones. So rather than spend time looking at apps I've never looked at before, I'm going to take a look at some of my favorite apps in terms of apps that I use a lot of. And that's Series Guide, IMDb, and if we get time, I'm going to take a look at TripIt as well. Now, before we get started, I just want to clarify a little bit about what we're trying to achieve here at the Friday App Review. So unlike a lot of the review shows that you may have seen, we're not really focused on sort of giving a fair and balanced evaluation of what are some great apps that we think you guys should be installing. We're part of the developer relations team here at Android, so our focus is really on trying to help developers build better apps. And so to do that, whenever we look at these apps, we're really trying to dissect them, take them apart, see what they're doing right, see what they're doing wrong, and really try and create a learning experience so that other app developers can learn from the mistakes and the successes of these other apps. So really, the app review doesn't make a lot of sense as a title, so we're actually going to change the name of our show live on air, and so from this point onwards, we're going to become the Friday App Clinic. Now, in order to maintain that new branding, I have some props. So I'm going to disappear off camera and get my props.
Rayto's gonna come back soon.
Don't panic. And Daniel, if our producer off camera can also switch our title so that we can become the Friday App Clinic, that would be fantastic.
Double the size of our production team.
That's right. Twice as many producers.
Oh, did you remember to tell your off-camera engineer to include your new title, your mythical new title, in his title set?
Yes. One moment. That's all right. We have all the time in the world. All right. So
No,
I have my.
you have an hour.
I have an hour.
Actually, more like
You have an
45
hour.
minutes.
45 minutes.
Let's
Oh,
do
well,
an hour.
then we should get this shit sorted out. All right. So we have our
We have,
Dr. Droids.
Yeah,
I have my lab coat.
where's mine?
You have to bring your own coat.
I have to order it.
It's
I have to order
yeah.
it.
I mean,
Yeah.
come on, man. This is
That's what that box was for.
absolutely.
Yeah,
You
okay.
you need to order your own equipment here.
Just pretend this is white.
This is a
coat.
white
Can
coat,
we
absolutely.
Can you color correct it?
Color correct. You should have worn at least a green
Yeah.
shirt so we could, make do.
Next time, maybe.
That's right.
All
That's
right.
right. I snuck this up on Fred here as well. So this is his first clinic too. So I can be the official clinician, and and Fred can continue to be a reviewer. So let's get started. Let's have a look at one of your apps. Let's start with. What would you like to start with?
Yeah, I decided to stick to something that are related to recipe, and both of these apps, as I mentioned earlier, My Food, Big Oven. If we could switch to the tablet, please. Both of these apps try to tackle the problem where you're trying to figure out what's for dinner, and then you have to figure out what kind of dishes you would like to get. And after the preparation stage, you can translate the types of ingredients into some sort of shopping list. And these two apps try to solve this problem, and they try to do it a little bit differently. And why don't we have a look at My Food? So as soon as this app is launched, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's got three high-level menu items that you can pick from: shopping list, recipes, and meal planner. And all of these are very prominently displayed, which is nice, which makes it very easy for users to comprehend. So you would go into recipe first, but before diving into the content of recipe, I like to highlight that when I tap on any of these targets, there's no touch feedback. So I would like what we've been asking developers to do. When you come up with graphics icons, be sure to have them represented in different states to represent the natural state, focus state, and press state.
Absolutely, and that's really important, particularly for accessibility. So if you want blind users to be able to use your app, or even just people who are using accessibility type features to make it more easy, then having those touch targets selectors is really important.
Right. And before going into any of these, let's have a quick look at the menu. So there's help, settings, the items that the usual suspects, basically, are things that you would expect to sit under the overflow menu.
Absolutely. I'd want to point out as well here that looking at this main screen here as well, you can see that we've actually got an action bar, which is good. But in this case, I think actually it would make a lot of sense to have an action bar which was perhaps translucent, because you've kind of got this whole screen effect here where it's sort of this immersive thing, completely custom controls. The action bar almost looks a little bit sort of plunked on top. So perhaps changing the color of your action bar to match the background or have a translucent action bar would be an interesting design choice.
I like the suggestion on translucent. Let's have a look at the recipe screens. As you can see, in this drop-down box, there are different types of occasions, like starter, sides, dinner, whatever. There are different categories that you can choose from, and it pre-populates with a bunch of delicious dishes.
Absolutely.
And you can swipe through the selection of dishes. So these are the top-level recipe items, and what you can do is to look at the various ingredients and the steps involved in the preparation of the dish. What I would suggest is that when you have a tablet, right, the most probable use case is someone using your app in a kitchen. I might be sitting 3 to 4 feet away from the tablet. The font size as it stands is kind of a little bit too small, right? I don't know
Yeah,
if you,
it is. It's a little
having
small.
a hard time in reading the text.
Exactly. What you want to really have is so that you can set up the tablet on your kitchen bench, probably a little further away from the food and
Definitely.
sources of heat than you would want otherwise. And so you really want to be able to see this text from a good sort of 5 to 10 feet away, assuming you have a bigger kitchen than me.
Yep, definitely. And have a look at the overflow menu. I wish they had an option where you can increase the font size, but at least I can't find it from here. And what's interesting is that for each step you can go in and edit it. Sometimes people may
nice.
like to deviate from
Absolutely, yeah. There's
the
not a recipe I
recipe.
use that I haven't modified
Right,
slightly.
exactly.
You know what else would be really nice here? I don't know if there's any support for it, but to have the ability to add pictures for each step. I find that's really useful if I know if it looks the way it's supposed to, if I've done things the right way, like when they say brown it, how brown is it supposed to be? Those sorts of things would be really nice. So a picture of the finished product and also a picture of each step.
That's a great suggestion. Yeah, you can capture it for motivation.
Absolutely. Well, this is what I would do, right? I would do the recipe and I would take a photo of each step so that I was able to see the process of going through, and potentially even the ability to add a video, if I record the whole thing of how it all went. I see we've got Roman on screen, so what do you think, Roman? Have you had a chance to have a look at this app? What are your thoughts from a UI perspective?
So I haven't had a chance to take a full look, but just from looking at what you guys are showing now, kind of the same common problems that we see everywhere are showing up in this app. And they're not really problems. I mean, it's just, I think probably the lack of a tablet-optimized UI, and we're looking at this on a tablet. But one thing I wanted to mention was just on the very home screen, I guess the top-level screen that had that kind of massive dashboard. I just wanted to make a shout-out for I guess, against dashboards and using dashboards, especially on tablets. There are lots and lots of different ways you can, show kind of like a top-level screen, and some of those ways are actually listed in our design guidelines under the app structure pattern. So I definitely recommend taking a look there to see how you can get away from a dashboard. And you don't necessarily have to, completely remove the dashboard, but one thing you could do is potentially kind of include content right there. So when you're showing the big icons or the big buttons to get into a section, show a preview of the content that you're about to see when you tap into that section. So just one of the things
right? Some pictures of the dishes that you're trying to prepare. That's great. So let's go back to recipes. And as I was testing this application, I tried to add a new dish. At first, I thought, okay, this add button represented, but instead
that's a step within the existing recipe.
Right. But instead, what I was looking for is hidden. in the overflow menu.
Oh, I see.
New recipe. So I think it would be great, to expose this feature on the action bar if there's space.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there is plenty of space on the action bar for that. Add recipe seems like it would be one of the main features of what you want to
Definitely.
do within an app like
Right.
this. Absolutely.
And let's have a quick look at the shopping list. So you can have various shopping lists associated with the recipes that we looked at. So let's say you've decided on what to cook for dinner, then you can quickly transfer the list of items into your shopping list. I think it's a good use case where at home the user might be using a tablet to come up with a list of recipes, and then based on the recipe, the list of recipes, you come up with a shopping list. And then if you support something like syncing with the cloud, when you take your Android device out, you can have the shopping list with you at the grocery store, where you can mark off various items.
Nice. And do you know if this has the ability to sync? Like, are you signing in at any point? If I have my tablet, which lives in my kitchen, or at least in my living room and kitchen, to be able to do recipes, can I
think
sync that up with my phone so I have my shopping list with me?
There was, but I can't recall. But if assuming it does, I think it would be a good use case.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Nice. So that would be my wish list. I think for me to just go ahead and start using this would be pictures, lots of pictures. Food, eating and preparing food. A big part of that is visual. So being able to see what the cauliflower cheese soup looks like is going to make it much more likely for me to actually create it. Certainly, whenever I'm using cookbooks and recipes, seeing that picture of what it's going to end up like is a big thing for me.
Definitely. And I also say that for this kind of apps, where initially there's a bunch of data entry involved, you might want to think of ways to make it easier for users, right? Because I imagine if it becomes too cumbersome to enter a lot of text, that you'll experience a lot of drop-offs. So you may think of ways to maybe support scanning for barcodes and stuff like that. That would make it a lot easier for users to use it. Or alternatively, you can have a lot more pre-populated items for people just to pick and choose from an existing list. That would be that would make the user experience better.
Yeah, and in fact, even thinking this through, actually, that's probably the way I would start to use this. So right now at home, I have this big folder with recipes, which I've pulled out of newspapers and photocopied from people and printed out emails. And so I'm probably not going to want to enter all of that in straight away. So my first step would just be to photograph each one. Just give it a title and then scan in the picture. And then I can always go through and actually sort of populate the fields separately later.
We're getting that.
We're getting the wrap. We have 35 seconds left to go.
Right. And we have a new prop.
We have a gong too, so we want to run out the time just so we can have the gong go. It's very important. I don't think we should actually just wait 22 seconds until it goes off. But so let's see.
Right.
So we've got the categories here. We've got everything else. Yeah, it's actually looking pretty good. Why don't you gong us out, Ian?
Awesome. All right, that's our signal.
I really hope that was
just came
audible.
off? Wow, how did that happen? Oh, great. I mean, all in all, it's a great start, and it looks like the development team is a pretty small team. So
absolutely. So if you guys are watching, if you hear about this, then do reach out to us, and we'll try and help to give you that extra feedback to help really make this into our go-to recipe app.
Definitely.
Now, I don't want to cut Fred off here, but I didn't really think this through because I haven't had lunch, and looking at recipes is making me hungry. So let's switch across and have a look at one of these other apps.
Sure.
Does that work for you? All right, let's restart our timer. We're trying to be a little more conscious of time.
Which one do we want to look at?
I want to have a look at Series Guide. So this is an app I use quite a lot of, and I think it was actually Roman who put me onto this. Are you a Series Guide user as well, Roman?
I am. I absolutely am. I think this app is one of my favorites for tracking episodes and TV shows.
Awesome. Let's switch to a
Cool.
tablet.
So yeah, let's have a look at the tablet view. And so these are some of my favorite apps. I'm going to be particularly not harsh, but I'm going to have a pretty high bar for some of the comments that I have here for them. And so one of the big kicks that I'm on at the moment is trying to create apps that present a magical experience. So apps that you're not really thinking about them running on a phone, you're not thinking about the internet connection, you're not thinking about anything other than the functionality that they provide. So that's kind of the basis around which I'm going to be providing some of this feedback. So if you look on the Getting Started guide right here, we're asked to choose our primary content language. We have the ability to connect to a social network associated with it. and an option to send developer usage statistics. And this is all fair enough. But the problem with it is that straight away I open the app and I'm presented with all of this text, all of these choices. So generally speaking, I find it much better if you just load up the app and it straight away dumps you into whatever it is that the app is supposed to do. So I would suggest to the developers here to actually see if you can remove all of this on startup, so that you're just able to get straight into the gear. A little concerned by what I'm hearing over my shoulder, but we'll continue.
And the other thing I want to mention is, when you just get into an app, usually you're presented, or in apps that are just list views, or just where the primary content pane is basically empty because you haven't done anything in the app yet. There's no need to present a dialogue. Just present any sort of introductory material, like stuff that you do happens here, right in line. There's a big opportunity to use the kind of the empty view. When your list view has no items in it, use the empty view to be more visual and do so right in line in the content instead of presenting a dialogue if you're going to do it at all.
Yeah, I totally agree. And in fact, if we dismiss this here, we get exactly that. We get this massive pane of emptiness, which just says no shows here. And so now what we're supposed to do is start adding in the shows that we are interested in watching. And you do that by hitting the plus button, which makes total sense. And then we can start searching for shows. Now, what you'll also notice it here, you've got this trending tab, which shows you a bunch of shows which other people have been looking for. Now, there's a bunch of these that I actually do want to track. Now, I don't know, what do you think, Roman? For me, I would love to see basically that intro screen being all of the trending shows, which I can then just go in and add right off the bat. So that's sort of the way you get started, is by seeing a whole bunch of suggestions based on what other people have been adding, and have that ability to just go, yeah, Breaking Bad plus, Game of Thrones plus, Dexter plus.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then, because straight away you understand what it is that the show is offering. So again, here we have kind of this big dialogue explaining what the show is, giving us the synopsis and the ability to add. Now that's useful, and I would certainly like to have that as a plus. But in an instance here, I'd even more so prefer just a bunch of plus buttons along this outer edge.
Right.
So that I can just say, well, I know what Breaking Bad is. I've been watching it for the past 5 years. So I just want to add it without having to read about
it. The pop-up felt a little bit like discontinued experience, right?
Exactly.
The other thing is that, the way this is listed, the way shows are listed in this app is they're basically listed as a list, right? It's a vertical list of things. Whereas with really kind of media-friendly stuff, like content, media-rich content, presenting something as a grid is generally just better. It leaves you more space to show nice big photos. You can even overlay the titles over the photos so that everything, almost every pixel on the screen, is covered by content. That's generally better than presenting just a list of thumbnail on the left and
small thumbnails.
Text on the right.
Though I wonder if the feed that they're getting from, if they have bigger assets.
They do. They absolutely do. Cool. In fact, it's one of the strengths of this app.
You do take advantage of it.
So let's go back to the main menu. So I've added a bunch of shows, and you can see straight away that they're already presenting something better here. So once you go to the shows that you've already included, you get the that grid view which Roman was talking about. But even here, I'd say there's an opportunity here to use that space more, to use bigger assets, so this becomes a really visual experience. Having the images associated with these shows is, I think, a really powerful thing. And so I would consider making that a much bigger part of each grid item. Very much along the lines of what Roman was suggesting. So the point here is that it's telling us when our next episode of all of these shows are coming up. So we have a bunch of options that we can choose to. So if we go into settings, we have sort of this wall of settings which allow us to do things like only show episodes which have already been on before, which reduces my list, which makes me sad. But you can see exactly what's coming, and then you can go into each of the shows, Game of Thrones, and then you get all the details, so the directors, guest stars, what episodes are on or coming, and you can see here in the background you've kind of got the big graphic, right?
Yeah.
Not coming across as well for that one.
So what does check-in do? Just real quick.
So check-in, I think, if you're logged into Tracked, or possibly not, it lets you basically have that social aspect where you're checking into the show. So if you're watching it, you check in as part of that. Have you actually used that at all, Roman?
feature right here.
No, I don't use the check-in as much, and I know that this is kind of a growing, more popular interaction to actually check into shows as they come on, but I haven't used it myself. It is a very popular thing with services like GetGlue and I believe Tracked as well, but haven't used it.
Yeah, I guess it's around that whole second screen experience idea, where you're sort of socializing while you're watching TV. I struggle with it because I very seldom watch TV live. I'm always time shifting it and watching it at least an hour or so later.
Yeah, like the Olympics.
Yeah, well, the Olympics is not by choice, but this is not the forum for me to
Yeah.
rant because I don't have enough time to explain exactly how I feel about the NBC coverage of the
I'm
Olympics.
just pointing out that similarity. Yeah.
Absolutely. So yeah, well, the other thing which I have to say about this app, so like I say, Roman suggested this to me, and I use it a lot now. But one of the things I struggled with when I first started the app is that it wasn't immediately obvious to me how everything worked. So the plus icon being add show, wasn't immediately obvious to me that that's what it was going to do. I didn't necessarily understand the workflow, and so I think that's something which would be really great to be simplified and better explained. And I think sort of giving me that list of suggestions right off the bat is going to help.
Yeah.
But sort of help me through the workflow, make it more obvious what I need to do at each point, and that will make it easier for me to use all the features.
And in the action bar, they have a mix of text and icons for the action items. So maybe they can. This is actually a combined activity with a clock icon and a search icon.
Yeah, it does have the tiny little vertical separators. Actually, no, there is a missing vertical separator between plus and activity, which is really confusing.
Right.
So it looks like it's the same thing.
Yeah, and it wasn't apparent to me that the clock icon actually it's tied to the activity text.
Search. Okay, so it's the right search icon. So I mean, generally speaking, they've done things well, but I'd also be really cautious about things like your settings menu, where there are a lot of things here. Advanced and everything else you may consider. So this is actually using the old preference activities rather than the newer preference fragments. So there are a few options that you have here to actually separate things into categories and make it a little bit easier to dissect. So I'd want to have things like advanced and more, almost often a separate category, so it's not sort of confusing the rest of it, because this is a little bit intimidating. You've been using it longer than I have, Roman. Do you have any particular suggestions that you'd like to point out about what they do well or what they could do a little bit better?
Yeah, I think, before, I think when this app just came out, it was using the default theme, and a lot of my comments are visual, so this will be some visual feedback, but before, I guess a couple of months ago, this app was using the default stock Holo theme, so everything was kind of Holo blue and everything, and that was good. I think that, obviously you do want to modify, you do want to kind of brand it a little bit. In this case, I feel like the branding is, kind of that neon purple. It doesn't really mesh all that well with the rest of the Holo UI, the Holo style. So, for example, all the window backgrounds are using the default kind of Holo gradient from I guess black to like a dark gray, and then the neon purple on top of that doesn't seem to really mesh well. So what I would do is I would probably go through and clean up some of the UI. I feel like there's some parts that are really remnants of the default Holo style. So I would just make sure to kind of either customize more. Stock and branded kind of custom UI isn't as great as it could be. It's definitely better than a lot of the other apps that we've seen, but that could be improved. Another thing is, this is very specific, but when you get into an episode of a show, there's actions at the top right, like search and favorite and share, and there's actions like right in the middle of the screen.
Yeah,
so one of the
check-in, etc.
Yeah, I find that a little strange, and I think this kind of violates one of the core rules of putting things near the corners, near the edges. It's a little easier to find, a little easier to discover, unless the inline actions are really obvious. And in this case, I feel like they're buried under the content. So one thing that I do really often is, mark a show as watched, and I feel like it's kind of buried in a sea of text. So that's one thing that I would try to do. If you do have actions that are inline, make sure that they're more visible, that they're more prominent, that they stand out, apart from the content that surrounds it. Because otherwise, it may not be obvious, it may be difficult to locate.
Cool. I totally agree. And I think for a lot of those, it would make sense to just have them in the action bar, because as you say, they're kind of primary actions, having watched a show. So our gong has gone off, so we're going to have to move on. But I think that's some interesting advice. I think the key things here is that visually, I think they could do a lot more with what they've got. More images, more grids, more density of color and imagery. And similarly as well, I think, just to give a couple of examples from what Roman was saying, and hopefully he'll agree, I think in terms of customized branding, if you have a look at an app like Gigbeat, does a really good job of that. They have their own custom color schemes, which is throughout the entire app and is consistent. And tasks and tasks free are a good example of an app which you're actually using very much the standard paradigms.
Hey,
Guys,
so
producer Ian here.
We
We just want to mention that one of our viewers took a look at the page for MyFood, and it turns out that they have actually, you know what? You guys should be looking at the camera. There we go. See, now we can talk directly to each other. Hi, Rachel and Fred.
Hey, I haven't seen you for a while. Where are you calling from?
Nice.
Yeah.
I'm calling from Fred over here.
Okay. Anyway, no, I just thought this was a really interesting comment, which was that actually, you guys mentioned something about how it was a little bit sparse and not so many graphics, stuff like that. It turns out that there was a user request for a sparse interface, and the dev responded really quickly to that and made that. Sounds like maybe it should have been an option rather than a default, though.
It sounds like. So, I mean, it actually brings up a really interesting point, particularly if you're creating an app which is quite popular. It's going to be impossible to satisfy all of your users. And so, like, me and Fred can sit here and have exactly the opposite opinions about the same app. And certainly once you get more than a couple of thousand downloaders, you're going to have the same problem. So one thing you can do there is use analytics a lot to figure out how people are actually using your app. And so you can do things like institute options where you have show images, don't show images, and then find out which people are using more, and try and build your user interface around that. So definitely something you want to consider is, before doing those radical changes, is to think about how people are using the app and give them the option to pick one or the other before deciding which is the best approach.
Right. Or if you have resources, think about doing things like A/B testing to see which one users react to better. So that's great. I mean, and also it's good to see that you are reacting to user comments as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. All right, let's have a look at your next app.
The next app is called Big Oven. It's like I said before, it's another app that consists of a lot of recipes where it tries to gives you some ideas on what's for dinner, what's for lunch, and stuff like that, and you are able to identify the items and create shopping lists based on the recipes.
Nice.
So
I like the fact that they've got a tablet layout right off the bat. This is making me happy.
They have a tablet layout, 2-pane layout with a big logo here. What stands out initially is that I see 2 search functions here. So you have a duplication of features on the very same screen. So you can think of maybe eliminating one. Maybe there's a specific reason why you decided to include both. It's not, but it feels duplicated features. So let's do a search on something.
What's your favorite recipe?
Something that has to do with beef.
Beef? The real developer, if you were a real Android developer, it would have been bacon.
There you go. So it shows you, a bunch of pictures. So these are user-generated content with star ratings. And you can, let's say, go pick one, beef chili with beans, loading recipes. The latency.
I was going to say, if we just drop back once, this is a really good example of an app which is using that visualness to really draw you in. So you've just got this wall of beef, which could be quite intimidating, but in this case it's just making me really hungry. I do notice that it tends to be a little bit slow in terms of particularly this loading more recipes. So bringing the images in here slowly, that's reasonable, although it feels like, based on the speed here, it feels like we're pulling down images much bigger than the thumbnails being displayed. So if you're pulling them down from a server and then shrinking them, try and have those shrunken assets on the server so you're just pulling down as little as possible. And things like this, the loading more recipes, try and pre-cache a little more aggressively. So you should have at least sort of a scroll's worth of data queued up so that you're not feeling that lag.
All right, when you go back.
And this is kind of unacceptable. You really need to find ways to cache your images.
Right.
You will, for memory reasons, likely still have to dump them out of your cache in terms of your memory cache and display them, but it shouldn't take this long to put them back in.
Yeah, if you want to look for specific technical tips on how to do it, we have a training class on Android training that specifically talks about loading bitmaps and caching and stuff like that. So check.
And we're actually, I think Adam Koch from our team is planning some updates to that. And another thing I wanted to point out is that in the Google I/O application, which is now open source, a bunch of new stuff related to image caching is there as well. So you could rip stuff right out of there. I believe we're updating the Android training article on that as well.
Awesome. All right, let's get back into the beef and chili with beans.
See, the loading latency, I think
it's a little slow, right?
Yeah,
I mean, that's when I was
pretty slow.
When I was talking beforehand about creating magical apps, that's a big part of it for me. Like every time you see a loading dialog or a blank thing which needs to be populated or fill up, it kind of breaks the magic. It ruins that suspension of disbelief, and you remember that, oh, this app needs to connect to an internet source and pull down this data and populate a list view. And I don't want to be made aware of any of that. I just kind of want it to magically happen, as though this was some crazy magic box with a future which had every recipe in the world somehow contained within it.
Right.
This looks nice. The UI here is definitely...
It's pretty clean. Yeah. Well, I'd like to repeat the feedback that we gave.
Yeah, bigger text.
Bigger text, but I think this particular app, there's an option where you can increase the font size, which is great. And there are different tabs, like recipe, reviews, and photos.
Excellent.
Of various.
Love
Again,
the
latency, I don't know what's going on here. We have a pretty fast network here.
You definitely want to be downloading those photos, and I rather suspect that the photos are bigger than they need to be, and so you're pulling. And I noticed also that they all came in at once here. So again, it's the same sort of ideas of making sure you download more than you download progressively, and make sure that you're optimizing those downloads to pull down as little as you need.
Yeah.
Actually, can I make a comment here on the UI?
Of course.
There is one thing I wanted to mention, and this is just happening over and over again. I feel like every app we look at on the tablet has this issue. So white space, there's just it's a much better use of white space than lots of the other apps we've seen, but still could be improved. And like you guys mentioned, increasing font sizes, things like that will help. One trick that I find useful when trying to optimize my white space is to take a screenshot of my app as is and start shrinking it down gradually. Shrink it down to about like 25% to even like 10% of its original size, and look at that, right? If you can still pick out your white space from the text, and if it doesn't look even, if it doesn't seem like there's kind of like a natural balance in the negative space and the actual text and content, then you probably have a white space problem. So try to think of how you can better fill out the white space, but don't pack in text into the white space. White space is still important, but make sure that it's balanced, right? So that's just one trick. Shrink it down and see if there's something that seems wrong in that shrunken version.
So I had a question actually related to that. So if you have a look at this this main search results page where you have all of these things. So I like that there's lots of images there, and we do still have those gaps between. Now I know that one of the UI trends that I've seen a lot of lately is basically removing all of those borders and having basically zero margins between images.
Wall of pictures.
Yeah, I mean, is that something you think would work well here?
Yeah, I think that can definitely work well in a lot of cases. In this case, since the background is white, I personally find that having this kind of 0 pixel border, like text overlaid on top of images, works really well if the rest of the background, I guess if the theme of the app is hollow dark or just a darker theme. Otherwise, the white will really stand out. So actually, one thing that this app may want to consider doing is trying that. Trying that wall of images with very little space in between, and having the text overlaid on top of the images, but then try to switch the theme so that the left pane is not so bright. The contrast will be way too high if you have that kind of wall of images and don't change the background.
And that's the other thing I was going to suggest as well. Like as Fred pointed out, I'm not sure if we can sort of empty the screen. So this is how we get to when we open up the app. Now, again, the whole point of a recipe app is to make me hungry, make me want to cook stuff. So it seems to me like this would be a great opportunity to put something here in this big empty space right from the beginning, like the most popular apps, or most popular recipes, or the your favorite recipes or featured recipes, random recipes, basically anything, because you have a random recipe button.
Why don't you just default it?
Exactly. It's an actual
maybe a big picture.
Yeah, or have a recipe, or have like a bunch of random recipes, but something which is going to inspire you, so that as soon as you open this up, you're like, oh yeah, actually, that looks like something I might like to create.
Almost like within 0 clicks, right? Assume you get featured on Google Play, you install the app and you press the open button. Without doing anything else, the user should think, wow, I'm definitely keeping this app.
Exactly right. And recent raves is perfect. Yeah, so this is what I would start with. So these are the recipes that most people have been raving about. If I opened the app straight, was featured on Google Play, I hit install, open, boom, and this is what I saw. Suddenly I have much more incentive than just from seeing this big logo. I can be like, oh, those Oreo balls look phenomenal. And straight away it's like, oh, well, I don't need much for that. It's got cream cheese and Oreos. I'm pretty much already sold. And then straight away you're scrolling through things, and again getting really hungry, which is again why we want to make sure that you don't have this long load time of each recipe clicking in. Because I just want to be able to scroll through this list and see anything which looks awesome and be like, oh wow, I totally need to make skewered honey balsamic vinegar kebabs. Wow, I need to stop.
Commenter HPC 2000 also mentions this app might be a little more attractive if they use the light holo theme on the action bar instead of the dark.
That's true. The inconsistency there is definitely an issue.
They sort of have the default blue line here
with the red thread underneath.
The red line is probably their brand, and you can definitely theme it a little bit. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, given that you do kind of have this strong color branding, you may want to consider using, changing the color of your action bar to match the recipe color branding. That's definitely something you can do. But I'm intrigued by Roman's idea of switching the whole sort of theme around to something darker and then emphasizing the images more.
Definitely.
I'd also point out that the actual text style that they're using here is a serifed font. Which works really well if you're, reading a book or something like that, but it doesn't work quite as well on computer screens, and particularly when you're reading it from a distance. So you'll notice most presentations tend to use a sans serif font, like an Arial or a Helvetica or something like that. And again, with this app, you may be browsing it sitting down on your couch, but you're going to be using it in the kitchen on a stand, and again from a distance. And so again, it's great that they let you bump up the text size. I would probably prefer here either an option or just a default to be a sans serif. Do you have a point?
One of the other things I wanted to mention around fonts is, and this is kind of unfortunate, I guess, I don't know if we just didn't have time or we didn't plan on it, but the new font of Android, the new typeface is Roboto, obviously. And there's no serif version of Roboto.
That's interesting.
So basically, a lot of the improvements, a lot of the kind of core image and design philosophy of Android is around the typography. So you're missing a lot of that by using Droid Serif. Having said that, I mean, there's also Roboto Thin and Roboto Light. When you have text that's larger, let's say like in the 30s or the 40 SPs, Roboto Light can really give it a sense of class or elegance. So coupled with increasing the font sizes, you may want to consider using the different weights of Roboto, and there are several. Actually, as of Jelly Bean, we bundle very, very many weights of Roboto, so you have more options. Or you could just bundle the TTF directly in your APK.
Outstanding. Cool. All right, so that was our gong in the background, so we're ready to move on to our next app. Which is one of mine. So Trip, it's kind of hard to demo without having some trips in there. We've only got a few minutes, so let's have a look at IMDb instead. So based on the two apps that I've looked at today, you can get a fair idea of how I enjoy to spend some of my spare time. But I'm a big fan of the IMDb app. So this is a great example of an app which uses very much its own custom branding. So this doesn't look like Holo, but it doesn't not look like it either. But it definitely looks like IMDb. We have this consistent sort of grey gradient branding with their quite distinctive IMDb gold logo. And again, if we look at what we've been talking about so far with today's apps, we load this up and straight away I'm presented with a wall of images. So I've got video front and center on a scrolling marquee. I've got another scrolling marquee down here of awesome looking movie posters. coming soon. It's the same. So this is basically it's full of imagery, and that I think it makes for a really compelling experience because straight away you've got things to look at, you've got things to scroll, you've got things to browse. So overall, I quite like that. It's not a standard action bar because it's too high to be a standard action bar. And they've done some kind of interesting things here, like this overflow menu is clearly not a default, the standard overflow menu, or even a standard pop-up menu, which a lot of people use to sort of simulate that effect. And so, I don't know, to me it almost works in that it's got the branding, it's got the grey and the gold, which is obviously the theme they're going throughout. But the weird rounded corners and the drop shadow kind of strikes me as being a little off. Like, this is the first time where I click something on the app and suddenly it doesn't quite feel like a native app anymore. What do you think, Ram?
Yeah, I do want to call out, like you said, the drop shadows, also some of the gradients, like the title bar, or the fake action bar has this kind of stark gradient. One of the things we generally recommend, this is not like a you must not use gradients on Android or anything, but we definitely recommend using fewer visual effects, things like drop shadows, things like gradients, things like glosses. They kind of clash with the minimalistic, cleaner style of Holo. And when a user gets their Galaxy Nexus or one of their ICS devices, they're kind of presented with somewhat minimal UI apps, right? Apps that give you content and minimize the number of pixels that are dedicated purely to aesthetics of the Chrome, of the surrounding elements of the app. So definitely minimizing that and using kind of some of the simpler, minimal styles would make more sense, I think. And then definitely using the kind of the stock action bar and tweaking the styles. Like, you can make that, if you absolutely need that bar to be taller, you can tweak that using styles. You don't have to re-implement the action bar.
And in fact, I'd suggest that they probably don't need to make it taller because it just feels stretched for no really good reason. I like that they've used the standard search widget here. That's great. These keys here, so movies, TV, celebs, that again strikes me as a little odd because they're not really actions so much as navigation cues. So as per sort of the Android standards, I'd expect them to be over on the left-hand side over here next to the IMDb logo. And similarly, I'd expect this to sort of behave like a standard action bar. I'm kind of looking for an up caret on the left here so that I can return to the main page. So the navigation actually works the way it should, but I'm missing some of those standard cues that I'm really used to seeing. So yeah, I'd kind of like to see these as sort of default regular tabs or something similar to that, rather than sort of being actions when they're not really actions.
The general pattern goes on the action bar on the left-hand side. You have the icon followed by navigation control, and put everything else like the action menu items on the right-hand side.
Exactly. Yeah. So things like search, they've got in exactly the right place. And having sort of all of this stuff in the overflow menu again kind of makes sense. I want to highlight as well here that they have the ability to sign in. So you can have an IMDb account and sign in, and presumably things like your watch lists and ratings history and the ratings you provide are all then going to be part of it. So what a lot of apps do wrong is that they don't let you use anything until you've signed in. So when you sort of install it off Google Play, hit open, the first thing you're presented with is this sign-in screen. And that's a real off-putter. Because it's like, well, I've not even looked at this app yet. I have no idea what it wants, and it wants credentials. It wants me to create an account. I want to know what I'm getting into first. And so I love that about this app, in that it lets you experience the full app, and it's not until you want to do something which requires you to sign in that it actually asks you to do so, and obviously lets you do so as well here in the overflow menu. So that style of presenting as much as you can and then having additional features as an incentive to actually sign in, I think is a really good pattern.
Great point.
Let's have a look. So, I mean, otherwise it's works pretty much as you'd expect it to. Let's have a look at Total Recall, a movie remake which fills me with dread. I'm a huge fan of Philip K. Dick, and the movie implementations are usually pretty questionable. Total Recall, again, is a movie I really enjoyed when I was younger, but
it's not a tumor.
I think that may be the wrong Schwarzenegger movie, but nonetheless, I always wondered about Schwarzenegger in the lead role of that, and Colin Farrell is a better match, but I don't know. I'm apprehensive, to say the very least, about this remake. But in any case, you can see here, as soon as we navigate in, again, we have a wall of pictures. We have a big image of the movie poster. We see the top build cast all here on the left. We have galleries. Now these aren't scrollable, so I guess you have to hit all to see more of the images. So, I mean, this is kind of interesting. And they've got this pop-up dialogue, and I hate pop-up dialogues, particularly when there's no obvious way to dismiss it. I'm going to guess that the back button does the job. But I don't know, like I feel like this could be done a little bit neater. I'd like that to just be
in place.
Scrollable here. Just let me scroll through.
I saw your first inclination on this section of the screen was to scroll.
Yeah, exactly, because they use marquees elsewhere in the app, and so I'd kind of like to be able to just flick through here and see all of the cast without having to change contexts. And the same with the gallery. So that if I click on an image, so it actually goes to the artist's page, and that all makes sense.
Well, let's check out how sharing is done in this app. Okay.
Done the right way.
As
the
expected.
right icon.
That's great.
So that's all nice. And as you can see, like they've really taken this custom styling to the final degree. Like everything is custom. These dialogues don't look like normal Android dialogues. They're quite tall. They've got the action, not the action bar, but the title bar on top. Now, there's nothing wrong with customizing the look and feel of these sorts of things, but particularly dialogues, which our general guidance is to use dialogues only when you're doing sort of a system level thing. That's when you pop up a dialogue. It's like when Wi-Fi is being disabled, or if you want user authentication, something which is sort of more than just the app, beyond the context of the app. That's really the only time you should be using dialogues. And if you're doing that, then they should look like the system dialogue so that people know what to expect. So here, what I would say is, rather than saying, hey, you should be using standard dialogues, which would, in fairness, look really weird on top of their custom UI, is see if you can get out of using dialogues at all. Whether doing things in place or having a different fragment switch out, some other way of navigating which doesn't, pop something on top of what you're doing. Do you hate dialogues? Do you hate dialogues as much as I do?
Not as quite, but
not as much.
I agree with your assessment in this particular scenario, where if this implementation was an in-place transition, it would be better. It felt like it was focusing on the right-hand side of the screen, and if a dialogue pops up, it just breaks the continuity.
What about you, Roman? In the couple of minutes we've got remaining.
I generally agree. I generally hate dialogues. I more than anything hate progress and loading dialogues.
Oh yeah, well they are of the devil, clearly.
In this case, I think dialogue is really just kind of a shortcut. I feel like in a lot of cases, when a developer, doesn't really have like a great idea on what's the best possible way to present something, a dialogue is a shortcut. And I've definitely done it myself. I've definitely just said, "Oh, just make it a dialogue." But definitely a more complete, a better solution would be just a fragment sliding in or something of that nature. But yeah, it's tough to avoid dialogues always because they're very tempting. But do try to avoid them.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Dialogues do represent often a shortcut. It's a way of being able to, as a developer, when you haven't really thought through all of the workflows, like, well, I need to present this information, how can I do that? And a dialogue is the easiest. It's like doing a print line as a debugging statement.
It's like a catch-all.
Exactly. It's like using a toast to be able to know whether or not something's happened. Like, we all do that as part of our development process. Like, oh, the service has kicked off, so I'm going to do a toast so I can see that it's happened. And then by the time you actually go to production, hopefully you've removed all of those. There's very few times you actually want to toast. And dialogues should be the same. That's when you really want to bring in like a UX designer or someone like that who can figure out how that information can be best displayed to your users. So I think that pretty much takes us to the end of our allotted time. If we want to give Dan and Ian any chance of being able to prepare in time to go on air. So next week, what we've asked for you guys to do is to tell us some podcasting apps. So that's what we're looking for. Is we've got all of the Google I/O sessions have been turned into a podcast. Same with all of the Office Hours shows that we do on Wednesdays. They're all available as podcasts. And really, I want to know, what do you guys think are the right apps that people should be using to consume these? So that's what we're going to be looking at next week. Hopefully, if you guys suggest some podcasting
Hopefully
apps.
We'll get some.
Indeed, I have a few which I use as well. So we will be doing podcast apps one way or the other. So it's either going to be the ones that we've heard of and use, or it's going to be the ones that you guys would like to see us talking about. So tune in for that. The other thing that we have, this is a special request, As you can see, we have a gong behind us. As you can see, it is a gong that has been optimized for a phone. So if anyone out there has a Gong app, which looks like a gong, and when you press it,
sounds like a gong.
Sounds like a gong. We want to hear about it. So there's an opportunity here to either promote your own app or build one specifically for us, and it will be up here on the Friday App Clinic every week. So that's the other reminder as well. We are the App Clinic now for those of us who missed us at the beginning, hence the white coat. We're really all about trying to look at the things which apps are doing well, things which apps are doing poorly, and try and help you guys and developers understand how you can build apps which are really great and provide a magical experience. So we're going to sign off, and we'll see you guys next Friday. Thank you for joining us.
See you guys.